Lesser events had occurred, some skirmishes and several burnings. Smaller castles had fallen, and though some major locations like Duskendale were among those, and at least 2 of Harren's sons, nothing historical had occurred just yet, though it was clearly building towards that. Today we reach the first major battle of the conquest, the first time a dragon was truly unleashed upon Westeros that we know of, and even if there were others, it would have been eons prior. In many ways, it was less of a battle and more of an opportunity. One opportunity for Aegon to set an example, one so powerful that others would not dare to test him. In that sense, much was riding on this, because if done right, other kings might see the wisdom in bending the knee, rather than fighting it out. Though he was more than willing to bring blood and fire to the battlefield, Aegon preferred willing surrender. He saw them as his future subjects, after all, so why kill them? They're gonna be his future soldiers and tax providers and all that. And there's no need to sow bad blood towards him and his family amongst those he had conquered. So the smoother the process, the better. So if it went wrong, if it was done incorrectly, well, there's a lot more work that could be created, a lot more blood and fire would be needed to fully subjugate the 7 kingdoms, or 8 kingdoms, or however many kingdoms there were. It was going to be 7 pretty soon, by his count. But there's exceptions to what I described in terms of how to do a conquest properly. Sometimes you do have to sow some bad blood. Of course, you're overthrowing people and killing people. You can't avoid that entirely. So, and if you do have to make someone angry, you still have to be thorough. If you're going to cause bad blood between families, best make sure that the enemy bloodline is removed from the Game of Thrones forever. It's one thing to make sure they don't affect you, but what about your children? What about your children's children? So better just get rid of them altogether. The lessons of Harren the Black and Harrenhal, as laid out by Aegon the Conqueror then, and a bit of a Song of Ice and Fire to look at it now. Well, we've got all that and more on today's History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome everybody. Live streams every 3 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Every video on YouTube and Spotify afterwards. Audio only available everywhere. And if you listen to the audio-only version on Patreon, well, it's ad-free. So you save a little time and get things through a little faster. Yeah, it's a little smoother bit of a ride there. Sean, how you doing today? I see you've got some drums on your shirt, but there's no drummer. What's that all about? Are you the drummer?
This is a clutch shirt from a concert I went to a few weeks ago. This is just the stage. Those are amps, you know. It's just a stage waiting for the band.
Nice. Well, I went to a clutch show 2 weeks ago. So it's the same tour that we both attended shows on. Yeah. It's pretty cool. That is the band I've seen the most of any band, by far. So you would think I might recognize the shirt.
Clutch could say that they both attended a meeting with History of Westeros.
That's true. Good point.
I think it's a band I've seen. I think it's a band I've seen the most too, but not by far. I think that I've lost count, but it's around 15. But I think I've also seen the Sword and Mastodon about 15 times.
Nice.
Give or take a couple. So.
Hell yeah.
I do have a drink that I was trying to make the color of the orange candle glow of molten rock of Harrenhal.
Well, it kind of matches the Kraken on my shirt. I've got a Sanrixian shirt on today. It's a Greyjoy shirt, and the Kraken is done in gold. But gold and orange can kind of look a little similar, especially on camera. It also matches the text of your Amelie poster behind you there.
Yeah.
Always coordinated, Sean. And Sean and I are coordinated, too. We're both wearing black. Shay's got dark gray, so it's pretty close. You know, we're coordinated. We do that. Shout out to our good friend Nina, whose blog is goodqueenalley.tumblr.com. That's 1 L in alley. Also 1 L in Tumblr, but, you know, you probably knew that already.
How latest many E's in Tumblr?
There's no E's in Tumblr. Yeah. That you might not have known, because you would think there would be an E in Tumblr, the website. They just dispense with that. What is with that trend getting rid of the E, like grinder and tumbler? The grinder and tumbler don't really have that much in common. Flickr, that's another one that did it.
Yeah.
What's up with that? I think it's just an extension of people running out of names.
I think
just running out of
Google
things.
The word Flickr, you're gonna come out with more things than if you brand yourself to be Flickr without the E. And then,
that's true, because the word Flickr has been used a million times, but the Flickr is an entirely new word that no one's ever. No I. That's a recurring joke I like to hear. Like, what are our grandchildren's grandchildren going to do for screen names? Like on, like everything's taken. People are already using like X, uppercase X, lowercase X, dot, underscore. It's just crazy. So yeah, they're going to just be running. They're going to have some great purge where all old nicknames will be erased and you can start over, and it's going to be like a screen name jihad. It's coming, I am telling you.
Your online names are just going to be like the second and junior.
We're going to go back. No, it's not going to get to the modern. It's going to go back to ancient times. Yeah, we're going to go redo things. That's hilarious. The latest blog post on Nina's blog is on the Accursed Kings. Shocking. She loves the Accursed Kings. So do I. It's a fantastic series. One day we're going to cover it in more in depth because it is a huge influence on George. And y'all would notice a lot of those influences just by reading through it, even without deep analysis. But we will do deep analysis on it one day. And Nina's wondering specifically on some of these influences, because the 7th book of Accursed Kings is very different than the first 6, because it's a historical fiction series, and it's bound by things that really happened, which doesn't always make a perfectly fluid narrative. That doesn't mean it's not amazing, but the 7th book was very unpopular, and it was never published in English when George first read it. So Nina's wondering if, since it was eventually published in English, did he read it, and is it going to influence his characterizations of people like Aegon IV, for example, because Aegon IV is represented by a few of the characters who were real people in the Accursed Kings. So you'll want to check that out, especially if you've read the Accursed Kings. But you will probably find it very interesting regardless, because, well, any kind of George influence stuff is often very interesting. Halfway through the episode today, we're going to take about 10 minutes to chat about DragonCon 2023. Ashay and I attended, and we got some good cosplay photos we want to share with y'all. Several of them are A Song of Ice and Fire related. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. I think you guys will appreciate that. And throughout the episode, we'll encounter topics that we've done full episodes on, and we'll point those out to you at the ends and during. So you can check those out if you haven't, or if you want to recheck them out so you can stay immersed in Westeros. That's our goal here, to make you feel immersed in this world. And if you want to stay immersed, well, the next thing to do, or next best thing to do, is move on to another episode. Our next hangout is going to be trivia instead of Quiplash. It's usually going to be Quiplash, occasionally a different Jackbox game or something else, but this time it's going to be trivia. And yes, it will be A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones trivia. It will be Tuesday the 26th at 9 Eastern. If you'd like to join, send us an email at westeroshistory@gmail.com, or contact us through the Facebook group or your Patreon. If you're on Patreon, send us an email there. Any of the various ways will work. We'll get the email and respond accordingly. Also, at the end of the episode will be the answer to this trivia question, which is, Harren the Black's grandfather, Harwin Hardhand, is inspired by what real-life Viking king? He's a pretty famous person, and so he has a little bit of a different question because it requires a little bit of real-world knowledge. On the other hand, I've mentioned this at least twice in prior podcasts, so you might remember it from that. And so you don't have to have known this from real-life trivia. You could have just listened to the podcast and heard me say it. Last time, Harren called his banners, only for them to join Aegon the Conqueror instead. Oops. Still, he believed he could win, given his confidence in the great castle he ruled and had just completed. We'll pick it up right here with the next bit in this saga, which is one of the more directly recorded moments of the entire episode, meaning the episode of Harren versus Aegon, not this episode, but it also serves for that. So it was one of the few times we hear Aegon's actual words. Quote,
"Once he had joined his power with that of Edmund Tully and the other river lords to ring the castle, he sent a maester to the gates under a peace banner to parley. Harren emerged to meet him, an old man and gray, yet still fierce in his black armor. Each king had his banner bearer and his maester in attendance, So the words that they exchanged are still remembered. "Yield now," Aegon began, "and you may remain as Lord of the Iron Islands. Yield now, and your sons will live to rule after you. I have 8,000 men outside your walls."
What is outside my walls is of no concern to me, said Harren. Those walls are strong and thick.
"But not so high as to keep out dragons. Dragons fly."
I built in stone, said Harren. Stone does not burn.
To which Aegon said, "When the sun sets, your line shall end." It is said that Harren spat at that and returned to his castle.
He should have saved that spit to put out the fire that was coming. Yes. It wouldn't have worked, but still.
I imagine Jason Schwartzman playing Harren.
Stone doesn't burn, eh? Well, he doesn't even know about wildfire, does he? Doesn't even know about wildfire. Stone totally burns, and Balerion his flames are hotter than wildfire. This guy is really not coming at this with a lot of knowledge, is he? And I also think Aegon's kind of baiting him here. He's like, I got 8,000 men outside your walls. Like, he knows Harren won't be intimidated by 8,000 men outside these walls. These walls are gigantic. Harrenhal is huge. 8,000 men isn't enough to take most of the great castles that we've seen in Westeros, let alone this one. So, like, it wouldn't be enough to take Storm's End. It wouldn't be enough to take, certainly not enough to take Casterly Rock. I don't think it's enough to take Winterfell. I mean, no, it's just, so I think Aegon knows this, that he's not going to intimidate Harren with just that. Because I think he wants the fight. I think, yeah, in most of these cases, as I said in the intro, he wants Harren, he wants these people to bend the knee to him. But he needs to make an example out of someone. We've been saying that a lot. And we've also been saying that this is the perfect guy to make an example of. So I think he knew Harren's pride would be enough to keep him from fighting or from bending the knee. But he wanted to make sure. So he worded things, the right way to not be intimidated. Not that he would be intimidated anyway. This guy seems just kind of tough-minded. But what do you think about that, Sean? Is that kind of how you read it? Or is this something you could just say, oh, George got the numbers wrong. He does that occasionally. He does, but I don't know. This isn't a mistake I've seen him make before. Like, he seems to do pretty well with battle numbers. Like, it's things like distance and money that sometimes he kind of fudges. But soldiers, I don't know that I haven't seen him make that mistake before.
Maybe populations, maybe
okay,
soldiers.
Yeah,
sometimes
maybe.
Some of the sizes of some armies might be bigger than they should be, quote unquote. But one way or the other, I think in this scenario, maybe, I don't know how to say it. It's like the idea that like Harren is playing into Aegon's hands, or that Aegon is trying to get him to, setting up a scenario that he shouldn't be afraid of. But what if Aegon actually had 18,000? Then Harren would have bent the knee?
Probably
no.
not.
80,000?
Maybe?
I still don't think
probably
so.
not.
Like, maybe that's the point where Harren's like rethinking things,
Yeah.
or maybe internally is worried, but I don't think he behaves any differently.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Which again is why I think Aegon is choosing his battle. He knows it's going to go the way he wants. He's calculated this moment and this battle perfectly.
Yeah, it's fully in the driver's seat. Nina puts another point to it, which is maybe he's taunting Harren in that those were his 8,000 men just a few weeks ago. And it's like, yeah, I have 8,000 men that used to be yours. That's the part in parentheses. So that adds to the taunt if it's meant that way, or even if it's not, it might be interpreted that way. And it's when you have a very proud man backed into a corner, there is not much they can do but kind of go down with the ship. Again, we'll see Argilac the Arrogant kind of do a similar thing. And
to be fair, it's not just pride. He really does have the biggest castle in all the land.
That's true.
You know what I mean?
He
has legitimate reason to believe that he can withstand this.
That's a good point, yeah.
Even with the dragon, he's even saying, like, what are you going to do? Like, because there are a lot of dragons, I think, that could have not done what Balerion did.
Right.
It's not crazy for him to scoff at the dragon even.
Yeah, I agree. It's not crazy. It might be foolish, but it's not completely crazy. And also, yeah, there's the point about more men not making much difference, but there's also the point of what does Harren stand to gain? What does he stand to lose? This kind of things, like the risk reward and all that. Like with Argilac, Argilac knew he was going to lose. Like, was like, okay, I'm just going to die with the sword in hand. He could, like, doesn't have his helmet on anymore. He's just like, yeah, I just want one last fight. You know, he knew he was going to lose. Even if he won that duel, his army was defeated, and that was it. That's not necessarily the case for Harren, as you're saying here. We don't know if Harren was just like, I'm going down with the ship, aka my castle. Kind of appropriate for an Ironborn, though, to go down with the ship. But, yeah, we don't actually know that's what it's at. He may have, until those flames started pouring down on him, he may have still thought he was going to win. Obviously, he was wrong. I wonder what his sons thought. 2 of them had already been killed, so what about the others? We also don't know if one of them had just been promoted to heir after those other 2 had been killed, if there had been like a shake-up there, or maybe it was one of the younger ones that was killed. I tend to believe that it was one of the oldest was one of the ones killed, because that's usually like the one that's sent out to do things is the eldest. Amongst the Ironborn, especially when they're not worried about protecting the heir, they're like, no, you got to get out there and lead by example and lead from the front and prove yourself as a warrior and all that stuff. And as we theorized, even they may have been the ones to suggest it. They mean like, hey, let's take a shot at them. Let's ambush them at night, kind of like how Brandon Snow wanted to do that to the dragons. So this sort of attitude is going to be pervasive. They're going to be like, yeah, well, we want to fight. We want to do something about it. We don't want to just bend the knee. On the other hand, with so many characters, so many people, maybe one of Harren's sons was like, I kind of want to surrender, but he's not going to say that. But you might hope, maybe if I survive all this, and I'll bend the knee when my father's dead. Now, that wouldn't work out either, of course. And Aegon, Nina points out, Aegon may have wanted to demonstrate that he could and would observe the standard forms of diplomacy and chivalry, even if he didn't actually believe Harren would surrender, which that is kind of where I'm at with it. I don't think Aegon believed Harren would surrender, but he still has to go through the motions and still behave like a Westerosi king should. Talk it out, engage in diplomacy, do the things that Seven Kingdoms culture expects, even if it's not necessarily smart or in his best interests in terms of risk and reward. It is in terms of presenting himself as the right king for Westeros. Things he does later, like adopting the religion of the kingdom and letting the various kingdoms continue to rule the way they had before for the most part. So he was definitely, as dominant and confident as he was, he also aimed to not make big changes, at least not at first. So that kind of fits in there.
I wonder if Harren had better insight about Balerion. If Aegon had announced his intentions sooner, or if the threat of dragons had been around for longer, if he might have built that castle differently. There might have been more underground tunnels, more less. The towers didn't necessarily need to be quite as tall, but the underground portion could have been stronger to maybe withstand the fire or the heat, or have secret passages out to come up from behind. I don't know exactly, but I feel like Aegon just had this perfect moment to take out this castle that wasn't prepared for Balerion, that understandably Harren was too arrogant about.
Yeah, and I like this part about tunnels. I wrote something in the notes about that too, because the point made in Fire and Blood here is that there's maesters observing this conversation. That's why it's supposedly word for word what was actually said between these 2 kings. They're both in black armor, 2 kings in black armor, just chatting away the day, having a good old time, And does that mean Harren's maester burned with the rest inside the castle? Because Harren stayed, to lead. He didn't flee. He didn't run down into the underground tunnels. There are tunnels. I don't know if there's a tunnel that leads out, from under the walls and some sort of escape tunnel. I don't think there's anything like that. I've never heard of that in Harrenhal. But there's definitely underground vaults and all this fresh water and food storage down there. There's definitely stuff underground. So I don't assume every single person in the castle died. I mean, it's so big, he didn't burn every inch of it. There had to be places where people could flee to. He didn't burn the Godswood. People could have fled to the Godswood, perhaps. So I'm not sure Harren's all that concerned with where the maester is during the battle. Once it kicks off, once Balerion is doing dive bombs, especially at night, he's like, where's the maester? Bring the maester to me. I need him with me right now. I'm thinking the maester might be like, I've got some things to do below the earth, and just try to. That would explain how we have some of these words, like the parting words, because there's words that he says that come later. Nina's like, I'm not sure how we know those words. Like, did Aegon's maester wouldn't have heard that? So how is this dialogue observed? This is my best theory for that, and it's pretty rational. Like, it's pretty reasonable. Like, the maester wouldn't just stand there in the tower with Harren going, "Yeah, I'm here with you to the end." I was like, "Yeah." Maesters serve the castle, so he's like, "Well, I'm serving the castle by," I don't know. Just think about, he's a human. He's not a warrior, probably, this maester guy, whoever he is.
There's some maesters you might imagine it from.
Yeah.
And maybe they are more militant, or one, I don't know, someone like Harren might have picked out. But it seems to me Harren and Ironborn in general would be like, whatever, I guess I'll get a maester. Like, they would be reluctant about having it in the first place, much less like really relying on them or anything. But yeah, it does make sense that there might have been some survivors and or some tunnel but again, even if there was some way that maybe someone could have hidden out and survived in some underground, storage spot or whatever, they still couldn't have heard it. How many people do you think were in that castle? Like,
it's a good question. I have no idea.
Certainly hundreds, maybe thousands.
I think thousands,
right?
Yeah.
And so some random escape tunnel that like a key messenger could flee from, you couldn't suddenly herd out thousands of people through
right.
You know what I mean? So,
not that, and Harren probably wouldn't give that order anyway. He's not like, he's like, stay. He doesn't care about their lives. And that's an big open question. Is sure the Riverlanders, the Riverlords turned on him as soon as they could when Aegon proved to be a worthy person to switch to, and someone that something that wouldn't backfire, because they were obviously worried about, well, what if Aegon loses? We switch to him. What is Harren going to do to us? If we aren't on his side. Now, whoever amongst the Ironborn were around the Riverlands, and this is a big open question. Like, how much did he bring some of the Ironborn lords into the Riverlands? Like, how many marriages did he oversee between Riverlords and Ironborn? How many did his father and grandfather oversee of that nature? So there would have been some family connections that were kind of uncomfortable, like families that didn't want to have these marriages and now they had a way out, but some of their children were already born, or some of them were already adults, and this isn't spoken of at all. It's just kind of glossed over that, eventually the Ironborn were kicked out, or the Ironborn were gone. But the process is, we don't hear it. So there's a lot of room for us to theorize and imagine. But we're not quite there yet, actually. We've described the burning, but we haven't actually gone through it. So let's do that. Let's talk about the largest candles ever. Westeros, the big 5 candles made of stone. Glass candles are more mysterious, but let's not forget about these kinds. Here's a great passage. Quote,
"When no dragon appeared, some may have thought that Aegon's threats had been hollow. But Aegon Targaryen took Balerion up high, through the clouds, up and up, until the dragon was no bigger than a fly upon the moon. Only then did he descend, well inside the castle walls. On wings as black as pitch, Balerion plunged through the night, and when the great towers of Harrenhal appeared beneath him, the dragon roared his fury and bathed them in black fire, shot through with swirls of red. Stone does not burn, Harren had boasted, but his castle was not made of stone alone. Wood and wool, hemp and straw, bread and salted beef and grain, all took fire. Nor were Harren's ironmen made of stone. Smoking, screaming, shrouded in flames, they ran across the yards and tumbled from the wall walks to die upon the ground below. And even stone will crack and melt if a fire is hot enough. The Riverlords outside the castle walls said later that the towers of Harrenhal glowed red against the night, like 5 great candles, and like candles, they began to twist and melt as runnels of molten stone ran down their sides.
These Riverlords that observed it, and the rest of those 8,000 men, how many years, probably all of their years, were they telling this story to their descendants and other people? Like, let me tell you about the day Balerion burned Harrenhal and overthrew the king, the Harren the Black, and his line that had held sway over our lands for 100 years. And in that moment, we were free. We became vassals of the Dragon King instead of the Iron King, and before that, the Storm Kings. So this was a huge moment, not only because it led to not independence, but a much better situation for them in terms of, once again, not being a truly independent kingdom, but not being ruled by a tyrant, being ruled, until like Maegor comes along. But, still, that's someone a lot better than Harren, someone that wasn't enslaving them and forcing them to build his great castle and causing their deaths and all that. A much better situation, something they could be a lot more proud of. They hadn't been conquered. They bent the knee willingly in this case, which is a lot more honorable. And so it's a big moment, just probably for the next several generations. And maybe it's part of why the Tullys, as we'll speak on a little later, stay loyal for a really, really long time. This moment was so demonstrative and memorable and just historical, right? And I think George, of course, knew that when he was writing it. And he understood what he was doing. He always does, pretty much. And I think he took a little extra care writing it. Like the way this is written, on wings as black as pitch, Balerion plunge through the night. That's a little less like a historical text and a little more like prose and poetry, right? I'm obviously not complaining, but like I noticed he sometimes jumps out of Gildane to become George R. Martin again when he's writing these really important parts. There's a little bit of a little meta there, I think. I like that. I like noticing that, because remember what we said right at the beginning of this reread? Like, yeah, some historians, they're really good historians, but they write so dryly that if someone else were writing the facts they had uncovered, it would be so interesting and readable. But because it was written by someone with not a lot of imagination, or just not great at writing, it's not as interesting. And that's just a common thread amongst historical texts. But not with George. Obviously, George is really good at making it interesting. And it's, in terms of a lesson, though, that's in the candles and all that business, it's certainly the biggest demonstration of what a dragon can do to a castle, or at least that particular dragon, as we continuously need to clarify. And who would want to test the lesser ones? Okay, so maybe the smaller ones can't quite do that, but would you really want to test it? Would you really want to find out? You're like, let's just not go there, And
there are two smaller ones also, right?
Yeah, and they're not small; they're just smaller, right? They're not hatchlings, right? And if I say who would want to test the lesser ones, well, actually, several people did want to test them. Several people did fight them, so there are some, but fewer than there would have been, I think. Like Torrhen Stark, maybe is an example of someone who was totally ready to fight, and then when he shows up and sees, he's like, never mind.
Some people fought them, and some people won.
That's true. There were some victories.
Like Meraxes was killed.
That's true, but that's still 10 years away. So until that happened, they weren't.
I'm just saying, like they weren't crazy. They weren't wrong to think like we could take a like someone did take a dragon down.
It's true. They innovated. They maybe looked into history. They looked to figure out what types of things had killed dragons in the past. They may have gone to the library.
Better.
The Dornish are just different and better.
I don't know about these Riverlanders or anyone else taking down a dragon, but the Dornish could do it easy.
It's clear they didn't have that technology, because when Harren is describing, like when we get the passage describing the weaponry, there's no large bolt throwers or anything like that. Neither on their ships, as we pointed out in that prior battle, or on the wall walks here, where they could actually do it. Remember, we talked about the ships, like you can't just add a big old bolt thrower to a long ship and expect it to be able to sail the same way. But a castle wall, especially the size of Harrenhal, it's a different matter. They could throw quite a lot of weight up there, and it would be just fine. I mean, these are walls taller than any, quote-unquote, any ladder, and thicker than any ram could knock down. So yeah, no question they could do that. But they were not prepared for it. And this is what Sean was speaking to, Aegon's perfect moment, in a lot of ways. One of the many things that makes it a perfect moment is that, yeah, they didn't have the right strategy. They didn't have the right thought process for this, let alone all they had was the bravery, but nothing to back it up. So let's imagine what it was like for both Aegon and the Ironmen. We talked about what the stories were like for the River Lords after it, but they were just observers. They were like, wow, this is incredible. But some of it would have been hard to see, right? Because the quote begins, when no dragon appeared, some may have thought Aegon's threats had been hollow. But what did he say? He said, when the sun sets, your line shall end. And then he flew really, really high up there. And now that part I don't quite understand. Like, why did he fly so high? Just to make a point? Just because he liked it? I mean, we hear later that he only flies when he needs to. So he's not someone that apparently enjoyed flying. So I'm real curious about that. It just speaks to the many questions about Aegon's personality. Like,
I think he's just trying to get out of sight. I think he's trying to get high enough that he couldn't be identified in the night sky anymore.
That's possible, but
Especially
it was so dark already. You know, like I wonder, could they have seen him anyway? I don't know. Maybe.
Especially because depending on where he starts flying up,
Okay.
right? They can see him. And as it gets harder and harder, it's hard to quite identify where he is in the night sky. And then he moves over when people can't tell that he's moved over and starts coming down straight from above. So imagine people are like looking out toward the west, waiting for him to come back.
Okay.
He's behind them, but they don't know that because he went up so high they can't see him anymore.
Okay,
That's what I'm assuming. I don't know, but that's what I'm assuming.
They could have expected him from the west, and then he struck from the east. And the castle's so big, you got a lot of archers and spearmen and crossbowmen facing one way. And then they don't even know because it's this big black shadow at night. Like they're not going to see that coming.
And even if they're looking in different ways, like if he takes off even slightly to the west and they're looking off that way, and then he's just kind of disappeared in the night and they can't see him anymore. They might even think he might come from any direction. So everyone is looking outward around the castle walls, but he's coming down right in the middle where no one is looking.
Yeah,
right?
He doesn't want to take any chances, maybe. Like, it's one thing for us to sit there and say, how could they see him? He doesn't need to go that high, but he doesn't know that for sure, I suppose. Maybe he just wants to be absolutely certain they can't see him and get really high up there. Either way, it's a neat detail. I'm like, oh, yeah, he's like, there's probably some symbolism here that I'm missing. Like, he just gets really high above them and then just dive bombs, and I don't know. Everything we've said about him and talked about him expresses confidence. So he knew he would win, and he may have even known how. But he had never done this before. He had assaulted small castles and didn't have to really go all out before they surrendered. So, I mean, he'd gone up against ships before, but those were probably easier, you know, in a lot of ways. Like, those are moving. Like, on one hand, they burn more easily, but they're a moving target, whereas a castle obviously is not.
Unless it's
Greywater Watch, right? Okay, I stand corrected. All right, very good. And his strategy, he's also a little bit of turnabout is fair play, because what did Harren's sons do to him when he was on the march? They attacked at night, right? The Battle of Wailing Willows. I almost said widows again. And he's like, two can play at that game, and well, two meaning a dragon and a dragon rider. And the both of us kings can play at that game. And it says Harren encouraged his men. He's like, all right, y'all, you know, anyone who brings down the dragon or the dragon rider can have this daughters of Strong or Blackwood or Tully, or all of them if you want. So he's really just, you want 5 daughters to wife, you can have that. Now, these are Ironborn, so that's kind of already normal-ish for them. Rock wives, salt wives, they already kind of do that. And just because he was brutal to his subjects doesn't mean he wasn't an effective leader in combat. Like, these two things can coexist. He projected confidence. It may have been foolish confidence. It may have been more in the bravado category than confidence, but either way, his men a lot of them would have followed along. It's pretty weak, though, obviously. To me, this is like building a bomb shelter. Like you said, Sean, there's probably these tunnels underground, if not tunnels, chambers that wouldn't burn, you know? This is like standing on the roof of your bomb shelter. Like, you've got a good shelter to hang out in, but you stand on the roof of it while the bombs are dropping instead. No, you need to get inside. And he was inside, sort of, inside the towers, but those obviously were insufficient. So so like you said, Sean, he seemed to really truly believe they could bring the dragon down. Like, it only takes one arrow, one crossbow bolt in the right spot. So like, you can kind of see, like, you're not bringing that dragon down. If he saw Balerion from the parley, looked down over his walls and saw that dragon, he's like, okay, we might not be able to bring that down with spears and arrows. But that rider, come on, it's just one guy, right? We could surely shoot him down. He's probably, like you said, he probably has thousands of men. They're all up on the walls with their weapons. It only takes one lucky shot. Which Aegon knew that too, which is why he attacked at night when their aim would be off. And all they're doing is aiming at this giant black, it's just a blob of shadow they're aiming at. They can't distinguish where he is on its back. He's there somewhere, but they're not even aiming at him. They're just aiming in his general direction. Like, where the shadow is, they fire at a shadow because they're not actually seeing anything. They're just seeing nothing. Like there should be stars there, but there's not, so the dragon must be there. Oh, there's some flame shooting out. There he is for a few seconds. But like, Sean, picture when he's attacking the towers. So there's 5 of these giant towers. The towers don't have guards standing on them shooting back. Those towers weren't designed for defense. They're designed for observation, for gazing out across his lands. They don't have, like, no one expects men to be up there to fight against. They're like hundreds and hundreds of, like, the top of the high tower doesn't have, like, an arrow slit to shoot down. Like, it's hundreds of feet. No one would be up there. So they just didn't prepare for this. So yeah, so he's up there breathing fire on the towers, and they can't even launch an arrow at him because there's no one up there. Like, they're all down on the walls. Like, this was very poorly thought through. But what could they have done?
Even if there were people up there with arrows, there again, the windows are looking out and down, not up. They can't see up at this dragon coming down at them, and might be blinded by the fire at the moment that they got into range. And I wonder too if Harren even was an angle in his head he was considering, especially if he didn't think the dragon could actually burn the towers, burn the stone, that it might strafe by, it might kill some people, it might get hot. Let's hide below. He'll burn our grain up or something like that. Excuse me. But he still might not have anticipated that it would actually melt through the stone.
Yeah.
And what he might have anticipated was the dragon would just get tired.
Yeah, right.
It would just run out of flame. It's tired of flying. It needs to land. The dragon rider's thirsty. He's tired of himself.
Yeah, seriously.
He might have thought kind of like an army sieging, that this is going to be attrition that takes weeks maybe.
Yeah.
And it slowly, the people start to run out of food and run out of morale. Slowly the dragon starts to run out of energy and his flames just aren't working. And then Aegon would give up. You just didn't anticipate. Nope. One night he'll just burn it down.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's a great estimation there, Sean, because yeah, like I wrote that in our notes. Like, how long can Balerion do this? He burned all 5 of those massive towers plus other spots. Like, how much flame can this dragon generate? Apparently huge amounts. Yeah, it would have been more than we would have guessed, I think. Like, is there some sort of food that stimulates this? Did he pause and flap back down to the ground, eat a quick aurochs, and then fly back up? Yeah, for all we know, Harren was planning a counterattack. He's like, once that dragon's tired, once it lands, we rush out of our many gates, because they have many gates, and attack them from a bunch of directions, and they're unprepared. Maybe it's a morning assault. Maybe as soon as dawn breaks, they're not ready for that. Maybe they're overconfident. I don't know. But yeah, they could have prepared for something like that, a counterattack. I agree. I mean, Harren clearly expected some things to work out, and he's not a dummy. As brutal and tyrannical as he was, he wouldn't have gotten this far by being stupid, or at least by being stupid about everything. He may be stupid when it comes to dragons, but yeah. And we wonder if he had other...
And to be fair, it's not like he's stupid and everyone else is smart.
Yeah.
No one really quite knew. We don't even know how well Aegon knew what Valyrian's
this may have worked out better than he thought. He's like, yeah, this is going great. I didn't realize I could just take these whole towers. He's like, wow, look at that. The stone's cracking. Awesome. But he may have done his research. He may have looked up past, how did Valyria, in its many, many wars in the prior eons, they probably have treatises on military strategy and how to use dragons effectively in taking castles. What type of castle is it? How large is it? Is it like Giscari castles, Giscari fortresses? They had 6 wars against the Giscari. I think 5 wars against the Giscari. The Giscari had castles and fortresses, and the Valyrians had dragons. So this would have been a kind of a standard thing. Both how the Giscari defend against dragons and how the Valyrians react to those defenses, and yeah, they would have been written about, and military history textbooks and military strategy books, and
some of that writing might have been lost though.
Some of it, yeah, you're right.
Aegon might have had to relearn some of this on his own.
That's true. There may not be like a vast library of these things. I believe we see some of that in real briefly in Pentos and House of the Dragon. Damon is reading some books of that nature. Kind of got me thinking about that. Some of y'all as well, I'm sure. I love that idea. It's like, it's just a random scene from the TV show, but surely there are libraries like that in the world,
I say it later in the document, but it seems relevant enough here that I think he probably did test Balerion out in a few ways. Like, I bet he
Breathe on that stone there. Let's see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, just some rock quarry, some seaside cliff face. He just like flew up, told Balerion Dracarys, how hot can it get? Will it melt this rock? Maybe even where did they get the rock to build Harrenhal? Go to that
Get
quarry
that exact
with
that's a
Balerion.
good point.
See how hot it can get.
I like that idea.
Kind of like it's almost like a trope. I didn't even mean to be comedic about this, but like someone gets the new car, or Tom Cruise is in his new fighter jet or whatever. Let's see what this baby can do, like push the speed that you can hit and like test the heat of the flame. How hot, how long can Balerion go? It makes a lot of sense to me that Aegon would have known his dragon well enough, tested this out. Everything else seems very well calculated and planned and under control. Why would this thing not also have been something he was very familiar with?
Good point. Yeah, why not test it? Yeah, what's his capacity? What can Balerion's flame do? We'll test it to its extremes. So he had his family there, Harren, not Aegon. Now, meaning his remaining sons. We don't know about the rest of his family, whether he had queens there, or a queen, or if she was on the Iron Islands, or if she had already died, or if there were multiples. And this is a big open question. He didn't have any daughters of his own, as we said, because he was offering, other daughters, and he said, if I had any of my own, you could marry them. He did have at least one great aunt, because we know they married into House Volmark. This is an argument used on behalf of young Meryn Volmark after Balon's death, so many hundreds of years later, meaning Balon Greyjoy. So this is obviously centuries later. But that apparently is remembered and cited, so it's relevant. Now, yeah, if Harren's sons probably were old enough to fight, which is why they died in those towers, but maybe because otherwise maybe they would have been sent to safety, not necessarily away from the castle safety, but down in the vaults or what have you. Now, Iron Men are typically more comfortable fighting on the deck of a ship, is what we're told, than elsewhere. But recall, these are kind of a new breed of Iron Men. Now, after this, they go back to the old breed because they're kicked back to the Iron Islands. But this is 100 years of land-based Ironborn ruling the Riverlands. So, sure, there's still lots of sailors and raiders and pirates back on the Iron Islands proper. But in Harren's inner circle and in Harrenhal and in the Riverlands, there would have been landlubber types that maybe wouldn't have done a lot of sailing in their lifetime. So, yes, they're Ironborn, but yeah, it's relates to that trivia question I gave when the Vikings started conquering and they kind of ceased to be Vikings at that point, because that's not really, that's sort of a description of what they're doing and not really, it's not like a title. And so when you're ruling over a people, you're handling things differently. You're not out there raiding and reaving. You're garrisoning and defending borders and things like that, and expanding borders maybe, but raids don't. That might be a part of your playbook to weaken and spread your enemies thin, but it's not what your entire people do from now. It's not your main thing anymore. So it's been 100 years of this. So it's a different group of people. They might be more accustomed to fighting in castles. Maybe not defending them, though. Attacking them, yeah. Like Harren would have. It's a lot of taking over of the Riverlands, even though that was done by his ancestors, not by him. So this is a lot of things about the scenario that says these are a different group of Ironborn than what we might be used to. That said, Harren did still rule the Iron Isles. They were still part of his kingdom. He would have drawn soldiers and sailors from there, and some of them would have probably been at Harrenhal and died alongside him. He may have been able to trust them more than a lot of the Riverlands, especially after he called his banners and very few of them showed up. But we're told the Riverlands returned to Aegon. There's nothing about the Ironborn going over to Aegon. In fact, we see that they resist him when he does come to the Iron Isles later. That's obviously in the future of our coverage here. But I got to think some Ironborn showed up for him, even though the Riverlords didn't. It isn't mentioned, but I kind of assume it's true. Maybe some of y'all have different takes. Maybe they also took this opportunity to abandon him because he was a land guy, and they're like, no, we don't like his dynasty. I mean, he probably wasn't very nice to them either.
I mean, they might have just not had enough time to get there.
Yeah.
From the point that he calls them, they decide to go pack up their stuff, get on a ship, take the ship across the, what is there a river that leads there? Like I don't think they can get there in 3 days.
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
you're right.
I think it's going to be, I don't know how long they had, but I think even if they had enough time, they also have to like get through enemy forces that are sort of the 8,000 troops that are surrounding Harrenhal.
Yeah, and that might be why there's so few. Maybe that's part of like a something in between the lines here that we can extrapolate, is that maybe, yeah, like the Malisters, who their whole purpose for existing is to fight Ironborn. Maybe they're like, yay, they might have been one of the first to flip to Aegon. They immediately said, we're gonna not send a lot of troops over here. We're gonna defend the coasts against the inevitable Ironborn reckoning that comes from this, and once they're unleashed, we better be ready for it. And that would be a compelling argument, and a lot of people would be up for that. And so it wouldn't be like Aegon couldn't say no. They'd tell him that's what they've done once they show up. Like, hey, we left men back there to fight against the Ironborn. He would probably say, okay, good choice, I guess, you know, and it probably is a good choice.
Didn't need your men anyway.
Yeah, I didn't need your men. It's true. I totally did this myself. And so it totally shows how helpless conventional weapons are. There's a lot of lessons here, not just the lesson of what a dragon can do, what this dragon can do, what loyalty can mean, like what happens when you rule people wrong and they get a chance to switch sides. So many lessons that are play out in the short term, lessons that play out in the long term. Like obviously Harrenhal, we'll talk about this in a little bit later in the second half of the episode, how much of a testament Harrenhal still is to this day. How quotes about it still refer to Harren's folly and Harren's ghosts and his sons and Aegon. It's still a lesson to this day. The context of the lesson has changed over time. Maybe it's more symbol and less lesson, but it's still 300 years later has that impact, which is why I think it's just so clever of George to write it this way and of Aegon to think about it this way and be like, you know what, if I do this right, this is something that will last for a long time as a symbol of draconic power, as a symbol of my house, as a symbol of a lot of things. And that's just really neat, the way George mashed so many things into this one episode.
You know, I wish I had done maybe a little bit more tooling around with this, but I you know, just prepping for this, trying to do some research. I used a search of Ice and Fire, search for Harrenhal.
There's a lot of hits.
But I don't even, yeah, I don't even think I think I only searched certain books. You know, I don't even think I did like a full search. And it was, I don't know, 400 plus results. Like, this is a lot. I'm gonna have to narrow my search down a little bit. It's a lot to go through. But point is that that's how much it comes up through the course of the story.
Yeah,
you know?
it's in the top 4 most popular locations for chapters to take place in. There's King's Landing, which really is the Red Keep, because very little happens outside of the Red Keep in terms of POV chapters. There are definitely some, but most of them are inside the walls of the Red Keep. Winterfell, Castle Black, and Harrenhal. Those are the ones. I'm not saying that's the order, but those are the top 4. I'm not even sure what 5th would be. Yeah, I really don't know. I'd have to think about that.
To be clear, though, like a lot of the results for Harrenhal, you know, when I before I wised up to how long it was going to take me to go through 400 of them, it wasn't all inside of Harrenhal. It was people outside Harrenhal talking about it. Sometimes they're talking about going to it or coming from it or whatever. But
yeah, as a strategy point, you know, when they're discussing like the war and all that, yeah. Comes up a lot, but very true. And yeah, and so that's part, again, why I think George took extra care here, because he knows this is everything that happens during Aegon's conquest vis-a-vis Harrenhal. It's going to ring forward and be relevant to the story in ways that, sure, some of the other parts of Aegon's conquest are as well, but maybe a little less so. Now, also, the darkness that they're finding themselves in is going to work better for Aegon than certainly the guys who are trying to take aim and fire at some large black shape that's heavily, heavily armored. The scales of Balerion are so thick that even if you get a good shot off, it's probably just going to bounce off of him and he's not even going to feel it. And if you happen to get a lucky shot, I mean, what does a crossbow bolt feel like to a dragon that size? Like a splinter to us? I mean, it would bother you, but it is absolutely not taking you out of the fight. It might make you madder. It might make you go harder. But it is definitely not disabling by any means. And the fire itself, it's described as black fire with shots of red through it, which is how we know Balerion has some red on him, because the dragons have that coloration. And yeah, that's just extra level of terror. Like, what is this fire? This isn't even real. This isn't even natural looking fire. What's going on here? Now, once it catches flame, like once the grain and wood catches fire, that's going to look like normal flame because that's the fuel is the wood and not the dragon's gullet or whatever. But which would increase both their night blindness because there's burning fire near them and give Aegon an easier time of picking his targets going forward because it's like he's looking down on a bunch of fires and they're close to those fires, like being blinded by it and not able to see very well.
Even before Balerion starts setting things on fire, that's already a dynamic, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be torches and candles in the castle, which means from way far away, Balerion and Aegon can see right where the castle is. And if people with the torches and candles near them, their eyes aren't adjusted to the darkness far away. So
imagine the temptation to just run away. Like you're on the walls with your crossbow or your longbow or some spears or whatever, and it's dark. And everyone's screaming, and you're like, it's dark. I could maybe just get out of here. I could fall down. Like, would you like break your arm on purpose to be like, yeah, see, I couldn't do it. Yeah, I was out of it, like that way you can't get, no one can call you a coward because, yeah, I fell off the wall and, it would have been really like, they'd be like, what the seven hells is going on here? How are we doing nothing to this dragon? Like, he told us we could, and it's just going downhill. Darkness, fire. It really would be like hell because, like, you're thinking of seven hells. It's really like it's darkness, fire, a demonic being swooping in above them over and over, and no means to stop it. Some of them would maybe finally go, "This dumb king, what did he do? Getting us mixed up in this? Why didn't he just bend the knee?" But many of them would be too busy screaming and running to be having thoughts like that. What about Aegon, though? What's he thinking? Again, our lack of understanding of his personality makes this difficult. He didn't love to fly. He didn't do it as a leisure activity. That doesn't mean this wasn't exhilarating, though. Just being so dominant, being so powerful, being able to kill all these people, being able to destroy this castle that took 40 years to make. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people built it. And he's just taking it down by himself with his dragon that's bonded to him. No one else could do this. He's the only person in the world, perhaps, that could do this. Because I don't think Vhagar and Meraxes' flames were hot enough to do this, as we've guessed at before. How does that, he may have already had a lot of power gone to his head, but maybe even more, right? At this moment, when he was already confident, but now he's in the moment, he's seeing it all play out. It's going perfectly, and it just proves everything he expected, and it's all going the way that he wanted to, and it's the lessons he's wanting to teach, the examples he's wanting to set, everything's playing out pretty much exactly the way he wanted to. So I wonder what's going through his head. He's like, all right, the plan, everything is falling into place, like Hannibal, Hannibal from the A-Team. Like, I never love it when a plan falls together. Or is he just like, burn, you stupid Ironborn? Or is he just like, all right, this is proceeding as according to plan. Okay, let's see. Checks his watch. Like, okay, now to move on to the next tower. This is hot enough. What's going through his head?
I think he feels the tragedy and all the lives that didn't need to be lost over that.
Yeah, is he disappointed?
This was avoidable.
Yeah,
is what I would like to think, that he mostly just felt sad about it.
Yeah, it's possible. This is disappointing. Like if they had just bent the knee, then none of this would be necessary. On the other hand, we talk so much about wanting to set an example.
Yeah.
Did he, and maybe goading them a bit, like, I have 8,000 men. Did he want this? And yeah, so maybe he didn't want to kill all those people. Maybe that's why he focused on the towers. He's like, well, they'll get out of the towers. They'll leave the towers. I'll burn the wall walks and I'll burn the wooden parts, but mostly people are going to run away from that. He's not targeting individuals. Well, he couldn't anyway. Like, he can't see them, and that doesn't seem like the best strategy anyway. But obviously not. I'm not trying to downplay. There was certainly hundreds, if not thousands, of people that died. But he was aiming for the structures. The
towers also make a good visual symbol down the road. Yeah, you're probably less likely to have as many casualties. You preserve the structure enough that it can still have utilitarian purpose, which it still does. Like, hundreds of years later, it's still like I don't know, a housing or a place of storage and defense and whatever else. I have a one thing that was running through my head thinking about this was the way you were bringing it up just now, I was thinking about Oppenheimer. There's a moment in the movie Oppenheimer after the nuclear bomb's been used, and he's kind of reflecting on what that meant. Like he had this sort of certain pride in his scientific correctness, but then this realization of the meaning that it has, and it was kind of very powerful moment in the film.
Yeah, what does Aegon think
and also-
afterwards when he's looking upon what he's done to that castle? And he's like, oh.
Right. Yeah. Or even as he's doing it, it's like this plan. Balerion has the capability. Harren's not going to concede. I'll burn these towers down. Okay, I did it. Ooh, I did it. I don't know, you know. And it's worth noting down the road, it doesn't seem like the power really went to his head.
No, yeah, you're right.
Maybe a little farther down the road, the idea of still trying to conquer Dorne might not have been wise, but it doesn't seem like this was a turning point where he suddenly became tyrannical. That doesn't seem to be the case at all. So
I agree.
He might have steeled himself ahead, realizing what this meant, and maybe felt better tempering it by only attacking the towers. I hadn't thought in those terms. I'm also reminded of the movie Clerks when they're talking about Return of the Jedi versus how the first Death Star they blew up, but it was already complete, and so ostensibly it's all just Imperial soldiers and bad guys there, right?
Yeah.
But in Return of the Jedi, they're building a new one, and it's not complete, so there's got to be like aluminum siders and plumbers, just like construction workers. It's not like all evil people that are like hammering on the panels. Or maybe they are evil to work for the Empire, but maybe they didn't have a choice. Like we know from all the context of Star Wars, some of them were stripped into it.
They were prison labor. Yeah,
and which is certainly the case.
Yeah, this was absolutely prison labor.
And,
yes, or just enslaved labor, not necessarily even prison labor.
There's got to be just cooks and servants and people in there that didn't really have a choice about it. And, I wonder if or how much Harren or Aegon thought about that in front of this. And as we talk about it, the more and more I like the idea of like, he just burned the towers because he was trying to minimize the casualties of innocent people.
Yeah, because the towers are maximum visibility, maximum symbolism, fewest casualties. So you're right, and it fits into the other thing we were saying about showing off the dragon's capacity, not just his destructive capacity, but his stamina. Proves like, no, you're not going to outlast this dragon. He's not going to run out of energy. He burned 5 of these gigantic, largest towers ever built in Westeros in one night. That's just, that's beyond what we would have get. Like if we were reading the story for the first time, and he's like, well, he's going to try to burn down the towers. And we're like, is that going to work? Like we wouldn't have known if that was possible. Now we do. Now everyone knows it's possible because it was done so loudly, so demonstrably, and in such a central location to such a famous person.
The towers are also less likely to be the place where the cook and the
what's the cook doing up there?
the floor cleaner. They're probably in lower chambers and maybe even underground. The higher spots are probably where the nobles' rooms are, with the great views and etc. So
I agree.
I feel better about Aegon's, and on a lot of levels, I think I feel even better about this whole process.
Yeah, it's a little bit. Yeah, it's not quite as brutal as we. Yeah, and I love how he builds it up too. He's like, stone does not burn. It's like, yeah, but other stuff does in there that you have, like the wood and the straw. Oh, and actually, stone does burn. It's like, yeah.
That's another thought I've had a lot of times too about the atomic bombs that we dropped. If we just said, hey, at 3:00 we're gonna drop these bombs, just go look, just look on this mountainside rather than like murdering all the people in a city. Who knows? Maybe it wouldn't have been enough. We wanted the symbolism for the Russians to know how many people we could really kill, or that Japan wasn't going to surrender no matter what. But I wonder if he had told Harren, hey, at the quarry where you got the rock for Harrenhal, I'm going to fly Balerion in and burn the stone.
And show you.
Go watch Thursday at 4 p.m.
Or just haul some outside your walls. Like, I'm setting up some stone here, and I'll watch what my dragon does to it. Are you sure you don't want... That would also dishearten his men. Like, that would be a clever way to just take the morale out of his soldiers. Like you really want us to stand up to that? We were already pretty intimidated, but now, yikes.
Now, I'm still going to burn the castle, but you have the chance to evacuate first.
Yeah. So, House of the Dragon Season 2, we'll see what happens with that. We might get some visual examples that maybe give us a little bit of what this might have looked like. Honestly, the closest thing I can think of right now is just from Game of Thrones Season 7, when the undead dragon did its thing to the wall. That's the closest thing I can think of, or taking down a huge edifice with dragon flame. That's a little easier to envision because, ice, fire, like, of course, that's going to melt. even though it's such a huge thing and it's pretty spectacular. But yeah, that's the closest thing I could think of to compare to, especially with the like the weird colored flame, which looks so ghostly, and because Balerian's is black, that would look pretty wild and creepy and supernatural. And yeah. Speaking of, I wanted to refer to actually hold that thought. Let me do this at the mid-roll, which is imminent. So Harren's obviously horrible, arrogant, and etc. It's wild that, like you said, Sean, he was not stupid to not think that stone would melt here. Still, like, what about, like, he's cooked inside the tower, like, just from the heat building up, like being inside an oven almost. Like, you almost wonder if Balerion started lower and started cooking the lower part of the tower, then worked his way up, because otherwise they could just go down the stairs and get away before the heat gets too unbearable. So they were their escape was cut off, which makes sense. Like, Aegon could see that as a strategy, like burn the lower part and then work my way up to make sure they can't escape. But maybe he wanted to give them a chance to escape, and they were still just that stubborn, and Harren just stayed there. Maybe that's why he burned all 5 towers to make sure. But I wonder if he expected Harren would live through all that. He's like, really? He died in that? Like, what a dummy. Like, couldn't he have just gone? Like, he should have just taken shelter. Like, I didn't burn the entire castle. I burned the top parts and some other things, but
who knows, with the chaos in there, 2 people might have started fleeing from the top and just stumbled down the stairs and been stampeded, and the oxygen in the air is probably being burnt up and heated up. That, even as you try to run, you still suffocate. And
might be like napalm or something. Yeah.
I can also imagine Harren suddenly realizes how much danger his life is in. His inner cowardice comes out. He's running down the stairs, knocking down his only family members to get free, and comes up to a group of his soldiers that are upset that their brothers and sons were all just killed because of him, and just kill him himself. And, I can imagine
they find a charred corpse later, and they don't know what happened. Like, the tower's all melted, and they may not even know which body was his. Like, maybe they did because he had his crown or something, or his distinct armor.
But maybe not. It might have been melted completely into the mesh of metal of all the swords and armor.
They might not have noticed someone
melted stone.
They might not have noticed someone slit his throat. Yeah.
Yeah.
in the midst of all that. Same with his sons,
If he had survived, I wonder a couple things. If he had survived, I wonder if he would have knelt, if Aegon would have accepted it, or if he might have still executed him. Or maybe he even did survive and escaped, but didn't dare let anyone know because he knew he would be killed still. I wonder if that's a potential. I don't think so. I don't think that at all, but I wonder if it's a potential that some family member might have made it out of there, but knew their life was in mortal danger if they revealed who they were. So.
Yeah, now's their time to run away. Like, the king that was keeping us under his thumb is dying or losing badly. Everyone's turned on him. This is our chance to get away. It would be a time to be like, going back to Star Wars, right? We were using Star Wars. It was like, this is time to get off the Death Star before it blows up. Like, there were a lot of in the original Star Wars, a lot of stormtroopers were killing each other to get on the few remaining shuttles to escape. It's like, I could see something like that happening. You got panic, you got violence, you've got people who have little regard for each other and for human life in general. They're just thinking about themselves and trying to escape. And yeah, I could see it turning. And that may have been what Aegon expected. Like, they're going to turn on each other once they realize that it's hopeless, once they realize their king can no longer lead them, or if they realize he's dead, which I don't suspect word spread of Harren's death during the battle, because it would have just been so chaotic. Like, who's talking to who? What line of communication is happening
Word
here?
might have spread to a bunch of people who then got burned to death. So.
Yeah, and they ran away before telling anyone, or went and hid in the Godswood. And that's another important point. Yeah, as much fire as there were, and as much Aegon burned things, he didn't burn the Godswood. That's really important, and that he had to have been relatively aware of where it was, which brings us back to an interesting point. He did go inside Harrenhal to parley. Maybe that's part of why he went inside, to get a look from the inside. Now, he could have just looked down on it from Balerion, but maybe you get a closer look when you're there in person, And that would have been, and this also speaks to Harren's, maybe gives him a little bit of honor, or maybe he just didn't think of it. His chance to win was during the parley. That's his one chance to kill the Dragon Rider. He could have use treachery, use some sort of ambush, being like, okay, it's not coming to this. I'm just going to murder you now. It's not like Harren had a reputation to protect. He was already hated. But, for whatever reason, maybe he would have thought it was cowardly. Maybe he wanted to prove himself and be like, maybe he wanted the notch in his belt of defeating this Dragon King. Like, he was that's the level of his overconfidence. He's like, I want to show everybody just how Aegon wanted to show what Balerion could do. He wanted to show what his castle could do. And it just backfired. Yeah.
If he had won that somehow,
yeah,
it would have been a different story after the fact. He might have, quote unquote, united the Seven Kingdoms, conquered. Like, everyone might have.
They were already afraid of him.
To kneel to him or flock to him, even.
Yeah.
Another element to consider, though, a reason he might not have done something treacherous to Aegon was because he does have 2 sisters with dragons still out there.
Yeah, that's true.
Might not have ended it exactly.
Yeah,
so.
That's a good point. So either way, like, sometimes when we're thinking about, like, imagining what these powerful men were thinking, you have to aim high. You have to think of the confidence of a king. Like, he doesn't really consider losing, like, though that's not really a thing, like, I'm so confident that I don't imagine what losing is like, because even that is a weakness. So it's like this, like, cultured bravado, where they can't even imagine what it's like to lose. It's part of being courageous. I don't know.
I have an instinct to bring up a counterpoint to that, though, because I think sometimes, I don't know, rich, powerful, whatever people, they still have the same traits and flaws as average normal people too. They can still be selfish or stubborn or get angry. And I don't know, some naive 16-year-old high school kid in a swim meet might also not consider that they could lose. You could still, even if you're naive and not super powerful, still have the mindset of not considering a loss or what might happen, whether it's from confidence or naivete or whatever else.
Right on. Well said. All right, let's take a break here and come back with the aftermath, the lesson, what that lesson meant, what happened next, all that. But first, this episode is sponsored by HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com/50Westeros and use the code 50Westeros for 50% off plus free shipping. So effectively, that's more than 50% off since you get the shipping for free. It's America's #1 meal kit. Cooking with a recipe teaches you and leads to variety now and later. It's really fun to do something different. If you're like me, you will occasionally kind of get into a rut with what you eat, kind of just eat the same things. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's really nice to do something different, to have something new and something maybe you've never even imagined existed. One example we had from HelloFresh in the recent weeks was buttered shrimp, basically po' boys. They were little baby shrimp with these really delicious buttered rolls, like small, like basically a sandwich, and it had this purple coleslaw in it that was really tangy and delicious. It was a really perfect combination, the crunch of the shrimp and the tang of the coleslaw and the bread. It was really, really good. Came with these excellent roasted potatoes, those big chunky ones that are like potatoes just cut into fourths. Just love those things. And I wish there was more.
Big chunky potatoes.
Big chunky potatoes, as opposed to very skinny shoestring potatoes.
I want to clarify something, because I've looked into HelloFresh before, and I sort of have my system for shopping, and I'm comfortable cooking and everything.
Yeah.
And so I remember thinking like, oh, this is a fine deal, but not quite for me. But 50% off makes it a super good deal. Is that just 50% off blanket period, or just like the first order, the first month, or how's that work?
Yeah, it is 50% off for, I believe it's for your first several months. I'm not actually clear on that. Good question. I may need to clarify that. But yeah, I think it's on your membership code on your sign up. So we'll correct that next time around if it's not true. But yeah, I believe that's the case. So that's substantial. Yeah.
If anyone has looked at that and it was closed, 50% off makes it not closed. Yeah. That's a great deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. But as a bonus, if you are a cat owner, let me tell you, the box it came in, all 4 of our cats have slept in that box. It's a big, perfect cat-sized box. It's crinkly on the inside. You know how
like
cats
insulated
love that. So,
or whatever.
Yeah, it's insulated. Yeah, so the food stays fresh and it's got dry ice in it and all that. So, yeah. So we were excited to get the box, but so are the cats. Talk about making your whole family happy. So once again, HelloFresh.com/50Westeros. Use the code 50Westeros. And like Sean said, 50% off plus free shipping is a substantial discount. Check it out. And if it's not for you in the long term, well, you're not signed up for some long term. You're not stuck with it for years. Try it out. It might be something that changes the way you eat for a long time. All right. A couple of y'all sent in some questions. Callista Cross said, this is a super chat, says just dropping in to say hi. Can't stay at the moment, but I'm sad I missed y'all at DragonCon. I hope it was fun. DragonCon was a blast, and we are moments away from showing you all a few photos of it. But first, Marlee also sends a super chat, says, just a show of love and support for all the content and for the dragons, and hey, and for DragonCon here. There is like I said, Shay's going to put some photos up on screen here. Let's do that, and Shay can tell us what's going on, and I'll help add in some thoughts.
Oh, I will start with
real quick. I'll say, if you guys aren't watching this, this is an opportunity maybe for y'all to check out the episodes on Spotify, because if you're listening on Spotify and something visual comes up, you can just click a button and the video turns on, and you can just watch that short portion of the video. You're seeing more and more of that in the podcast world, where things are visual, but only for part of the show. We're on the whole time. You can be watching us, watching my face, watching my hand gestures, watching a Shay and Sean occasionally. But at times like this, it really pays to have your visuals turned on, and that's why Spotify is pretty useful for that, because you can just flip it on and watch what's there to be seen. And then when it's over, just turn it back to audio only. And that way you're not using up a lot of bandwidth, or maybe you just like seeing us through the whole time. So this is a good time to remind you that is a feature that you can take advantage of.
Also worth saying that if you want to see the full album of the World of Ice and Fire photos, if you go to the History of Westeros Facebook page, if you go to our TikTok, you can see photos and videos. So.
Yeah, there's a lot more photos than what we're about to show here. DragonCon is here in Atlanta, so we always go. It's real easy for us to attend. It's not, something we don't have to pay for a hotel or anything like that, so it's a real easy time for us, and we've been going for a long time. I've been to more than 20 of these, but this is one of the first times I did this is the first time I did more than one costume, and there I am in the middle as a crab feeder. You might not have known that was me because of the mask, but that is me right in the middle there.
Yeah.
Shay, you probably took like at least 6 or 7 pictures, huh?
Yeah. No, I must have like 2,000 pictures.
Yeah, I was gonna say add 100, multiply that by 100, then multiply it by 4 or 5.
Yeah, no, I had a lot of pictures. So this one's from the World of Ice and Fire shoot, which had lots of House of the Dragon and other history stuff. Which again, if you want to see more photos from that, I believe the album is the best thing.
Yeah, there's famous characters like a lot of Daemons and Rhaenyras and Alicents, but also some more obscure ones like Helena or like me, the crab feeder.
You can see some edits I did here.
Yeah, there's a Luke.
Some Aemons and a Luke. Here's some Daemons dragging crab feeder.
2
on
Daemons
the
dragging me through the surf. Yes.
Yeah, I don't edit. I did.
They're totally not being careful to keep their hands away from my sores, so they're definitely catching grayscale. Look at there, Harwin's being Harwin.
Yeah, Aziz and our friend Tom is Harwin, which is cool.
Yeah, that's Tom Snow. He does a really good Jon Snow cosplay too, as you can tell by his face. You could be like, oh yeah, of course he's a good Jon Snow.
Little selection of pics from that. I was not in House of the Dragon cosplay. This was my Expanse jumpsuit day. As you can see in this picture from us, I did a bunch of other cosplays, which let's go over those. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do a few non Song of Ice and Fire ones for
Here,
fun.
I did a Poison Ivy for Bunny Hutch Hef, and I ran into a Pepe Sylvia board, a Charlie Kelly cosplayer from Always Sunny.
Bunny Hutch is a recurring party at DragonCon, the first night every year. It's been a tradition for at least 5 years now, I think.
We did that. As you saw, I did my Expanse jumpsuit. This is a Fire Emblem emo night. I designed these shirts. I'm going to make some like this, but for House of the Dragon, for like the Dance of the Dragons battle. This is like tour dates on the poster.
Now that's Dom to her left, or her right rather, on the screen left, and Dom was one of the Daemons dragging me a minute ago.
Yeah, right here. That's also there. Very different.
Shout out to Folkwise channel. He is a member of that show.
And then I did another Fire Emblem cosplay. I did Yunaka from Fire Emblem Engage, and this is me they had like a Nintendo theme at the Hilton, so I took a picture with this Nintendo setup, which I thought was super cute. But you can also see here I am as Yunaka and Aziz as his Better Call Drogo mashup he does. And there's another mashup. Our friend Allie did Jorah the Explorer, as with the backpack.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was cute. It was clever. And our friend Meg as Dany, and our friend Amber as Asha Greyjoy. So that was the Game of Thrones shoot. Where Aziz also saw another crab feeder. Our friend, someone I know, Jack Durnan. He also does Expanse cosplay, so I see him every year at the Expanse photo shoot, and here he was, his crab feeder with the green screen. He's really smart.
Yeah, he did the green screen for his lower body. He's all in green so that when people take photos, they can edit his legs out so it can be just like the scene from House of the Dragon where Daemon's dragging him without his legs.
Yeah, it was really
so
good.
That was really clever.
Yeah, I love that. This is from the Game of Thrones shoot, which had, look at this great Aegon the Conqueror and his sisters, and Rhaenys and Visenya, which seemed extra fit, and the Iron Throne.
Yeah.
All seemed extra fitting given our episode today. I was like, I had to include them.
The woman dressed up as the Iron Throne, her name was like Mikal, I believe, and the way they do these photo shoots is they're like, okay, all the Targaryens get up there, okay, all the Lannisters get up there, okay, and it's always like, and anyone associated. So the Iron Throne is just like part of every shoot. So she was pretty clever, and she's like in every shot because the Iron Throne's associated with everything there.
Yeah. So that was one of my favorite of the Song of Ice and Fire cosplay I saw was actually these the Conquerors and Iron Throne were shot. But my other favorite cosplay I saw was in line for Spectrum. I saw Uncle Baby Billy from the Righteous Gemstones. And when he was doing his song and dance, as you can see there, and he had an accent, he was really in character.
There will be a payday, oh a payday, be a payday. That song that he's singing. If y'all haven't seen Righteous Gemstones, it's hilarious. Really
funny. Then there was I did a Rainbow Spider Gwen, as you can see here. Friend of the show, Chuck Lazaro. He has a website, Phantomaniacs.
Yep.
He printed it and sewed it and all that for me, and we worked on it together, and he helped me with a lot of my other cosplay too. And we also went to his birthday as it happens.
On Sunday, a little Sunday DragonCon Chuck birthday party.
Mm-hmm. So there's my Spider Gwen. Aziz did an Alan cosplay from Barbie. And tell us about Thulsa Doom.
Okay, so if any of y'all have seen the original Conan the Barbarian movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, this was the character played by James Earl Jones, Thulsa Doom, who is the main villain. He's a snake cult leader and has some magical powers. And I've never seen a Thulsa Doom cosplay. It's an iconic fantasy character, and over 20 DragonCons, I've never seen this done, and I was so excited to see it. Look at all that detail. Look at the snake head helmet, the snake medallions, and the man, had a bit of a James Earl Jones vibe on his own, without the costume. So it looked great. Yeah, I was super happy to see that one. And that was at the Spider-Verse shoot, so it was kind of a fun place to run into that.
Yeah, here's just a picture of the madness at the Spider-Verse shoot, which was very busy and hectic. There's me. And a whole lot of other spider people. This is like a small cross section of it. Like it was huge. It
was huge. It wasn't as huge as the Barbie shoot, which was unsurprisingly the largest shoot of the weekend.
We didn't attend the Barbie shoot, but we did do lots of Barbie cosplay. As you see, there's Aziz Allen and me as a rainbow Barbie with the pink cowgirl Barbie.
You can still see my Blackfire temporary tattoo on my right arm there, which I wore as we did Blackfire Day.
I did Barbie twice that weekend because I also did it for Barbenheimer. As you can see here for Spectrum, we did a rainbow Barbenheimer. I did the Pink Floyd edit for it. And that was my cosplay for the weekend. I did a whole lot of rainbows and colors, and it's got Aziz to do. What did you do? 4, 3?
4. Yeah, I did fancy crab feeder, regular grayscale crab feeder, Better Call Drogo, and Alan.
Yeah. So tons and tons of cosplay for us this time, and I will be endeavoring to get all of my photos up on Facebook and whatnot. I'm pretty deep into the Game of Thrones shoot, and I'll get those up next.
Yep. So once again, check our social media, for the best place being Facebook for that, but you can, if you find any of our social media, you can find your way to the others. One last thing about my Better Call Drogo costume. Yes, that is a Better Call Saul Drogo mashup. And what I did, you can't see it, you couldn't see it in the photo very well, but I have a bunch of ties strapped around my waist, like as it when I defeat another lawyer, I cut off their tie, and just like the braid. And I did have a braid with bells. You could see it at the bottom, so like right there at the So I did tinkle when I walked, like
Tinkle.
the bells from the book version of the Dothraki. So yeah. So I was a TV show mashup with the book version of the character, but also the show version of the character, because those blue stripes are obviously from the books, from the show, not the books. But the braid and the bells are from the books. So yeah. So yeah, great times, y'all. If you're ever thinking of coming to a convention. Well, don't think of them as similar. Don't think of them as all the same. We've talked about Ice and Fire Con a lot. That's only about 300 people, which is not a bad thing. That's really fun. You have a small group of people you can get to know really well. DragonCon had over 70,000, so they're both conventions, but you can see why that would be substantially different.
Ice and Fire Con and smaller cons, it's one interesting about them is that everyone's kind of there for the same thing. Everyone has the same passion,
Yeah,
the same
that's
knowledge
true.
base and everything. Where DragonCon is specifically trying to appeal to every different fandom. There's like maybe a focus on fantasy and sci-fi, but there's like professional wrestling and Predator and
Elijah
just
Wood
anime,
and Sean
everything you can
Astin
think
were
of.
there, like
Yeah, it's like a broad spectrum of anything that has a fandom that you can think of. Video games, board games, everything is featured at DragonCon. So you get a huge variety of cosplays and communities, and it's just a massive spectacle of an event that I didn't go this year, but I don't know, I've been at least a dozen, or I don't know if I've been 20, but a bunch of times, and it's every time it's a completely different experience because there's so much different stuff going on.
There was speaking of Elijah Wood, so Elijah Wood was there, one of the more famous stars there, and Sean Astin too, and so they were, Sam and Frodo reunited. A lot of people took photos with them, but my favorite photo of them I didn't get in that line or take photos with them or anything, but there's a photo making the rounds of someone who had done the cosplay of Gandalf. This was Gandalf, but Alf.
Yeah.
Alf, like the TV.
Yes, so it was Alf's face, but Gandalf's wig and robes and staff. Yeah, and
did you have a cat with
Elijah Wood, just his face when seeing that was just like he had seen the coolest thing he's ever seen in his life, and it lingered until he took the photo because his face is like he's pointing at Gandalf with his like his big grin on his face. Sean Astin's more just like, this is cool, he's got more of a like, I've been doing this all day, man, I'm a little tired now kind of look on his face. But Elijah Wood is just like, yeah, Gandalf. That was great. Letter from someone named Whitney D, sending in a little bit of a chemistry biology lesson about why maybe dragon flame having color isn't so supernatural. Well, the point is, I wanted to give Aziz some sound logic for this detail that might alleviate his problems with it. I have a ceramics degree, which I never use and serves little purpose. Hey, that makes two of us. I have not a ceramics degree, but a music degree that I don't make much use of, other than occasionally playing a Game of Thrones song. That's most of what I've done with it. However, in the process of getting that degree, I took my one and only chemistry class ever, glaze chemistry, and let me tell you how glazes get their color. It's from raw chemicals, or whatever you call them. If you want a red glaze, you need copper oxide or copper carbonate, and it needs to fire at a specific temperature. For green, you need chromium oxide or cobalts, or cobalts to make teals. So different chemical or different metals used at different temperatures cause different color fire. So different color fire is certainly a real thing. That's not a supernatural. I was at least aware of that much, but that does make sense. Maybe there's different bits of metal or oxides within their body or within their internal functional internal systems, whatever, and it creates an ignition or creates a similar effect of the heat of the flame combined with some certain chemistry within their body creates that coloring. It's not.
That's an easy thing for me to process the fantasy of.
Yeah.
Just like, I don't know, humans have different color hair, eyes,
Sure.
skin, stuff like that. Some just subtle difference in how the DNA processes the food they eat can just make the flame be. I mean, yeah, I don't know, like fireworks have all kinds of different colors, and
not to be too gross, but things that come out of us have a variety of colors too,
Yeah. No.
Okay, that was too gross.
whether or not you have the flu or
right.
dysentery.
Oh God. Yeah,
Why?
grayscale, Okay, so let's move on to the lesson. It lingers for so long, and let's start it with a quote.
Every child of the Trident knew the tales told of Harrenhal, the vast fortress that King Harren the Black had raised beside the waters of God's Eye, 300 years passed, when the 7 kingdoms had been 7 kingdoms, and the Riverlands were ruled by the Iron Men from the islands. In his pride, Harren had desired the highest hall and tallest towers in all Westeros. Catelyn could remember hearing old Nan tell the story to her own children back at Winterfell. And King Harren learned that thick walls and high towers are small use against dragons, the tale always ended. For dragons fly.
Yeah, you can see the writing, you could draw a line from the quote laid down by those maesters to Old Nan's quote right there, where it says, not high enough to keep out dragons, for dragons fly. And then here we have like that same line, that dragons fly, So it's almost distinctly the same. It's not quite the same. The wording's slightly different, but it's so neat to see how that has been carried down. The lessons of Harrenhal, perhaps exactly what Aegon wanted to intimate, wanted people to remember. Well, it seems to have happened, and it is still happening 300 years later. Yeah, leaving it was part of the point. I don't think he wanted to completely remove the castle entirely. Nina's going to give us an example of Bloodraven later and how it completely tore down White Walls and removed any trace that it ever existed. It's a different school of thought here. One is removing a place where people will go to pay homage to their fallen hero or whatever, where no one saw Harren as a hero. No one was going to do that here. No one's going to be like, oh man, remember when the Ironborn ruled here? Things were so much better. No one's going to say anything like that. They're not like, oh, what could have been? If only Harren's line had continued. Oh, the great things they would have done. Yeah, no one's thinking that like they were about the Blackfires. So it's not really a thing
Even
here.
other Iron Islanders might not think that. Like, we should have never gone on land anyway,
So it's better than removing it entirely from memory so people won't, yearn for that. It's better to leave it as this testament to what happens when you challenge the dragons. What happens when you go against Aegon? What happens when you're too proud? So it teaches a number of lessons depending on what chapter we're in. This is one of the great things about A Song of Ice and Fire and having Harrenhal come up so often, is that different people interpret it different ways. Like, Jaime is like, oh my God, I passed 12 murder holes just walking through the first gate to get in here. This place is absurd. Or Arya thinking about, ghosts and I don't believe in ghosts, and so to her, it's like another way to show us her bravery, another way for her to be her. Arya is almost at home there, in some ways, and it's great. And all this is because of what Aegon did and because of what the building was before that. Like, we didn't need this description of Aegon versus Harren. We like it, but the way it was placed within the story was sufficient to serve the story in its own way. But we're junkies and obsessed and we want more, and George gave it to us, so we're going to run with that. It's interesting to think, he clearly didn't envision Harrenhal as something he wanted to take for himself. Because if he did, he would have not devastated it so much. So it's a question of, had he decided where his capital was going to be? Had he already decided on King's Landing at this point? Because if so, well, Harrenhal's only 2 weeks ride away. So it's kind of cleverly placed close to this example, this lesson. On the other hand, he just may not have decided that yet. He may still have been entertaining possibilities. Like maybe he was still thinking about Old Town, or maybe he had never considered Old Town. Maybe he's like, no, I like the center. Maybe the Aegon fort he'd already planned on establishing it greater, building it more. It's unclear. There's still a lot of unknowns about what Aegon's plans were. He did start thinking about the Iron Throne, though. We'll get to that in a minute, but it's interesting to know there's at least one thing he thought about in advance and had decided on, apparently.
If he hadn't thought about King's Landing or decided on it, I'm sure he had candidates. I'm sure he had these are my potentials, and that was one of them. And I think that he had. I think at the point that he was negotiating with, or attempting to negotiating with Argilac, probably a reason why he was having that negotiation, right?
I could see that, yeah.
I think if he hadn't had it yet, that it was congealing in his mind at that point.
Nina also points out something that's useful to remember in terms of the order things happened. Visenya hadn't yet taken the Eyrie yet. She had gone to the Vale and had a naval battle. but the Eyrie itself hadn't surrendered. And apparently they had a different attitude. If they had wanted to just torch the Eyrie and force a surrender, they could have just done the same thing, but they didn't. So that really speaks to a plan, not just doing what comes. They had an idea about how they would want to approach this and who they wanted to subjugate and who they wanted to destroy.
It fits it perfectly in line with everything we've been saying so far. They didn't need to set an example of them. They weren't bad rulers, A. B, who's even going to see it? It's so far removed from everywhere. No one's passing by. It's not central. It doesn't serve to demonstrate the example. You know,
it's a great point. Yeah, the Eyrie is way the heck up there. Yeah, people don't see it very often. It's beautiful. Most people will never see it in their lives. But passing by Harrenhal, like almost anyone, like if you live in the Riverlands, it's something you'll do in your lifetime, maybe, unless you're just like super, super, super poor. Maybe you can't travel beyond your village. But even some like really poor people will have managed to see Harrenhal if they live in the Riverlands. But yeah, the Vale, most people that live in the Vale will never see the Eyrie. It's just too remote and too up there. Yeah, and so you're right. It doesn't serve the example. Plus, it's just Harrenhal is like this kind of brutal and gross symbol of pride, and it's a poorly designed thing in the first place. It's too big. Whereas the Eyrie is beautiful and elegant, and like it would be a shame to destroy that. It wasn't a shame to destroy Harrenhal. I mean, it kind of was, but not in the same way. It wasn't a work of art,
Yeah.
and it probably isn't a good place anyway. Besides that, as far as like just the demands of the place to supply it and keep it running is just
To be fair, the Eyrie has some of those troubles too.
You're right. They have to bring food up. They can't live there in the winter at all. Like that's kind of silly, but but they're not trying to rely on it in the same way. Yeah. So you're right. Yeah. There's still a little what's it called? Arrogance in the worked into the blueprints there. Some hoity-toity. All right. So continuing on in terms of how the lesson stands, like think about how it comes up in the Dance of the Dragons, right? It's the place where they meet for the Great Council. It still has this great prestige, and it's big enough to house all those lords and ladies in a centrally reachable location. Well, not all of them, but
and everyone gets to see.
Yeah.
Everyone's reminded, this is what the dragons can do. Everyone come to Harrenhal for this meeting and take note.
Take note,
of the burnt down towers.
We're only voting for Targaryens here. And when you vote for Targaryen, maybe keep in mind which dragon they happen to ride. Because the guy who rides Balerion is the one we voted for, is it? Yes, because Viserys won the Great Council. Viserys, rider of Balerion. Now, Balerion was dead by then. But still, it may have helped a little bit. Because he was worthy of Balerion in the first place, maybe, even though he just wanted to do his books and models. Not everyone knew that. I'm sure they propped him up a bit, like, Rider of Balerion, y'all, 10 years ago,
But even aside from whatever angle who you vote for might be, there's still just the reminder that the Targaryens have the power.
Yeah,
Your castles are not safe.
That castle,
you better stay with it.
That castle's still melted. Still nobody fixed that. Still no one repaired that. Yeah, did they? What? You wonder if that's part of why. Like, I don't want to take their symbol away. Like the Targaryens keep pointing at this as like it's their example. I don't want to like undo their example. Like I'm the Lord of Harrenhal. Do I want to rebuild these? First of all, it would be too expensive probably, but maybe even just one of them, rebuild one of the towers so that it's nice and whole and not all melty and weird. But they didn't. No one's even done that. So I wonder if that's part of like, no, we don't touch the Targaryen lesson. It's still there. But even when like Robert's there, well, the ruler of Harrenhal at that point is dirt poor because Harrenhal is, well, it's a white elephant. Its expenses are more than its profits. So, of course, you're not building new towers on it at that point. But maybe earlier, when it was first given away, that wasn't the problem, right? And we'll come back to that a little later. We're not quite ready to talk about the remade Riverlands, although that is imminent. Here's another quote about what it looks like 300 years later. Quote.
Harrenhal's gatehouse, itself as large as Winterfell's great keep, was as scarred as it was massive, its stones fissured and discolored. From outside, only the tops of 5 immense towers could be seen beyond the walls. The shortest of them was half again as tall as the highest tower in Winterfell, but they did not soar the way a proper tower did. Arya thought they looked like some old man's gnarled, knuckly fingers groping after a passing cloud. She remembered Nan telling how the stone had melted and flowed like candle wax down the steps and in the windows, glowing a sullen, searing red as it sought out Harren where he hid. Arya could believe every word. Each tower was more grotesque and misshapen than the last, lumpy and runneled and cracked.
I don't want to go there, Hot Pie squeaked as Harrenhal opened its gates to them. There's ghosts in there.
Jinkies. This is like a Scooby-Doo. That's really an amazing description of Harrenhal, and it's almost kind of like where George kind of jumps out of his historian boots to be his true author self to write. It's like, is Arya really having these really descriptive thoughts, or is that's George's prose? Like Arya, the 10-year-old, isn't thinking
this is so
in words
Reynolds.
this large. Yeah.
Yeah, she's not thinking it poetically.
She might.
She's inspired by old Nan.
She's just repeating what she heard from old Nan. In her
Which
mind.
I wonder, by the way, how does old Nan have this such a
It was all
Did
just
she
passed
go there?
down.
Did she get told the story by other people that went there?
I wonder too. It sounds like it's a common enough story, but her version of it's fairly accurate. It's not as crazy as some of her other stories, that aren't as believable. Even if some of those might have a grain of truth to them, this one is. It doesn't require a lot of embellishment. That's one thing that makes it so interesting. It's so great.
This
the way
one
it is.
might have a grain of exaggeration.
But it's mostly true. Yeah. And it's such a great description. I love the line, Arya thought they looked like some old man's gnarled, knuckly fingers groping after a passing cloud, which is like, that's basically Harren's strategy against Balerion. Like, oh, get him, we'll knock him down somehow. Somehow it'll work out. We'll take him out of the sky. Yeah, you may as well have been trying to grab a passing cloud with your old, gnarled, knuckly fingers, Harren. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And just how far they've melted. I mean, these towers really just, like they're still really tall, but the glowing a sullen, searing red as it sought out Harren where he hid. There's like onomatopoeia in there. Like Arya's she's a poet in the making. She doesn't know it. She's a poet and doesn't know it. Yeah. So is Hot Pie. Yeah, Aegon's lesson was so effective. The fall of Harren, such a compelling tale that it's accurately remembered, as we just said. I'm kind of repeating myself, but you got to my notes before I did, Sean. You said the same thing. Well played. Two minds thinking alike. Notice I didn't say great minds, just two minds thinking alike. Which is part of the so the embellishment here is pretty minor. It's the seeking out Harren where he hid. Like, okay, I don't know, the flames were seeking him out. That's poetic license. But that's basically what happened. He was in there until the flames overwhelmed him, and then he was a charred heap of ash. So yeah, it didn't seek him out, but it was inexorable and destroyed everything in its path. So yeah, we're just assigning some personality to the flames. We're giving it a brain here, but that is what happened in terms of the end result. So the topic of ghosts in Harrenhal, like Harren being angry, that all his pride, all his confidence was like carried over into the afterlife. That's why he's still alive. That's why he's a ghost, because he was, that's often how ghost stories are told. Like someone had such intense emotion, or they were so deeply betrayed, the murder, like the wife was murdered by the husband, and it was such a betrayal that her ghost lingered because it was so horrific. That kind of thing. Like some intense emotion enabled them to linger. But it's added in with the burning aspect, because the ghosts of Harrenhal are supposedly burning ghosts. And there's stories about people burned in their sleep, or fires starting and other things like that. And, well, it's a bigger topic than we have time for today. Harrenhal is a huge topic. Of course, the fourth most popular location in all of Song of Ice and Fire, maybe even third. Of course, there's going to be a lot to say about that, even though it's only 300 years old. But the ghost thing, that's something I want to come back to later. I just want to mention one thing, though. There's definite evidence of ghosts, but there's also evidence that it might be just mundane. Think of how big is a shadow from a flame? It can be really big. Like, think about the first Jon chapter. The flames of Tyrion that cast Tyrion's shadow make him stand as tall as a king, because that's the trick of the light. Harrenhal has enormous fireplaces, enormous rooms. The shadows cast in that place would be huge. The echoes in that place would be huge. So it's going to sound ghostly. Huge shadows. Like, that's just my starter. That's my little teaser for the mundane side. But of course, this is George R. R. Martin. He's not going to just make it all mundane. He's going to do both. He's going to do what he always does. There's the mundane, explainable, but also creepy, mixed with the supernatural. He does both. So I think that's where I land on that.
You know, a quick thought on this is that if there's 1 in X people have ghosts, right? Like, I don't know how it works, but however you might suppose it works. If everyone had a ghost, there would be like billions of ghosts all around. There wouldn't be any question. We would know it for sure, right? But since it seems to be kind of rare and special, it's maybe some percentage. Well, a lot of people died in Harrenhal all at once, so there would be a higher chance of there being a ghost, right? And if part of being a ghost maybe has to do with like fulfilling something that you didn't get to. Well, when a bunch of people suddenly die in their sleep when they weren't expected to, then there's more drive for the ghost to be haunting.
That's true. The rumors really spread. It's already primed. Like anytime something goes bad in
Yeah.
Harrenhal, people are ready to go, oh, that's the curse of Harren. There's already a pre-made reason for people's reaction, and that just keeps the rumors going, and which is part of why the visuals of the place, the fact that it's still used, the stories lingering, that's part of why all the stories.
And maybe he built it on native burial ground. Maybe he built it on
the werewolves,
children of the forest. Yeah,
you're not wrong. That theory, yep, you're totally, that's a valid
poltergeist
theory
element
for sure. Yeah. So yeah, let's set aside the ghosts for now and come back that some other time. Let's be more like Arya for now with this next quote.
If there were ghosts in Harrenhal, they never troubled her. It was the living men she feared. Wheeze and Ser Gregor Clegane and Lord Tywin Lannister himself, who kept his apartments in Kingspire Tower, still the tallest and mightiest of all, though lopsided beneath the weight of the slagged stone that made it look like some giant, half-melted black candle.
Here we are with that candle metaphor again. It comes up a bunch of times. That wasn't me calling it the candle. That's just how George repeats that burning tower, like a giant burning black candle, or 5 of them, as it were. So, yep, it's a pretty big deal. But yet, powerful people still use the place. It still has that gravitas, right? Like, Tywin takes up the position, like it says in there, in the Kingspire Tower. He sets up his office there and just makes use of it in terms of, not just in terms of it as an office, but in terms of it's dangerous and ominous and damaged, and as a symbol of power. It's a guy who likes to rule by fear. You can see how he would just slide right into that and make it part of his part of how people view him. You know, like, that's the guy that has no problem standing up to the so-called curse of Harren. Maybe didn't work out for him since he died horribly, though not in Harrenhal. So maybe that's not related. But still, he did come to an awful end, and as do most people who go to Harrenhal. There's still a few people, like Roose Bolton hasn't had a horrible end yet, but he did rule Harrenhal for a while. So that's another thing. Like, Tywin can twist it into his advantage and show his own, like, courage or his own ability to make Harrenhal his. Like, oh, this is dangerous, cursed castle, but Lord Tywin is strong enough to make it his. You know, so it still works that way as a symbol, sort of in a reverse manner.
And again, there's still this practical nature that even if the towers are burned, there's still basements and vaults and walls and armories and blacksmiths and fireplaces. It still has a lot of infrastructure with a lot of values.
Yeah, absolutely. There is much and much of that. Much and more of that. Indeed. Let's see. Next up, we're going to talk about the beginning of the Iron Throne. We briefly brought it up, but let's go a little deeper into that topic and start it off with a quote.
When the ashes had cooled enough to allow men to enter the castle safely, the swords of the fallen, many shattered or melted or twisted into ribbons of steel by Dragonfire, were gathered up and sent back to the Aegon fort in wagons.
So I think this sort of backs up your theory a bit, Sean, that he was already thinking of King's Landing as his site, because he's hauling the ingredients, the metal for his throne, which is clearly where his gonna put his capital, where his throne is. And he's already got this part planned out. So would you really haul all that to a place and then haul it again somewhere else? Maybe you might change your mind, but it's unlikely. It seems like he already had this idea that he didn't have enough swords yet, certainly, but he was on his way, and that process had started. This is the first mention of the throne's beginning, although it isn't called the Iron Throne yet. It's just talked about the fact that he's gathering swords. It doesn't say why. We know why, but it technically doesn't say that yet. So let's think about that. Turn that around a bit. What are his subordinates thinking? Do they know? Because he seems like a guy that doesn't just say all his plans. He seems like he keeps a lot of his plans close to the chest and then reveals them later or when he needs to, which is one of the few things we can say maybe about his personality. So you wonder, like, what is he doing with all those swords? Maybe he said so, and it's just not mentioned here. Maybe he's like, yeah, I'm going to build a throne out of this. But I don't think so. I think he wanted to maybe surprise people, overawe them with it when they first saw it, maybe, or once they learned what he was doing, they would be like, whoa. But just telling them in advance, that you kind of lose the surprise factor, kind of lose some of that oomph, I guess. I'm not sure about that, though. What do you think?
I could make a lot of my own counterpoints. I think that he might not have had this idea of the Iron Throne just yet. That I still think that he had at least tentative plans for King's Landing. And whether or not he had an idea for the Iron Throne or not, he might have been hauling all this metal there just to make more swords and more armor, more nails, metal, more building material. Okay. Yeah, there's a value to it. It's kind of a mess. He doesn't want someone else to get hold of it.
On the other hand, he's only taking swords, it says, which is... But that might be what... You're still right, though. That might be what people are thinking. Like, okay, he wants... Like, because this would be the best steel, the ones that make swords out of it. You know?
And it also might be what people are noticing more. If you have this sort of mesh of molten steel that some is swords and some is armor, but you have these spikes of blades sticking out, well, that's what you're going to call it, is the melted swords, and maybe not recognize or understand there's some...
That's true. There might be some fused metal. That's true. It wouldn't all just be... It couldn't be 100% swords. There would be a little bit of other stuff in there.
Yeah. And here someone might have noticed, like, I can make something symbolic out of this. And may have still used many of those swords to make new swords and new armor and everything else, but it set enough aside that, like, the symbolic meaning of a throne made out of these swords might be more valuable than more swords. And... even if he didn't have the idea for the Iron Throne yet when he was gathering the swords up, still having all this stuff brought to the Aegon fort is still an indication that that was going to be a center of operations, right? Even if he just planned on making more swords and armor at the Aegon's fort from this stuff, it's still an indication that that was a place he had plans for. So
yeah. Also, just to think about the fact that it says, when the ashes had cooled enough to allow men to enter the castle safely, I think that's probably not exactly right. There's a lot of ways in the castle, and I can't imagine every single entryway was too hot to walk in, because there's like postern gates, and like I don't know that he just torched the main gatehouse that Jaime walked through, for example, or if the entire place was too hot. I think this is just certain locations within the castle stayed too hot for a while. They were basically like an ongoing oven, you know, just a tight or relatively tight space with all that heat that's lingering in. It would take a while for it to cool off, and they're not doing anything to facilitate that quicker. They're not like dumping water on it. Like, there'd be too much of that.
Maybe there are entrances that weren't burnt down, but still, if you try to go through those entrances, it's too hot to breathe. You know?
Some parts of the castle would be off limits. Some parts, you know, maybe the whole thing is still just too bad. Which, if that's the case, if it's worse than we think, then that would take us back to where we were before in saying, well, maybe there weren't so many survivors after all. Maybe it was just so damn hot. There had to be shelter. The place is just so big.
Yeah, even if the entrance isn't burnt down, but if you go through it, it's too hot to live in. That doesn't mean that 3 levels of basement underneath couldn't still be cool enough to live. And there's a bunch of food and water stored down there, we know. So, you know, a couple hundred people might have made it. Who knows?
Yeah, and the Godswood is like 20 acres or something absurdly huge like that. So I think it's 20 acres, yeah. Like Winterfell's is like 3 acres, and Harrenhal's is like 20. So it's a huge amount of space of unburned area. Like, a lot of people would have taken refuge there. That's a sensible place to go just in general if you're if you're pretty sure he's not going to target it, you might think it's the last place you want to go. It's like, well, that place is just any second now he's going to burn that. But
what an awesome story that would be, by the way. Some sort of like future thing George does, or some fan fiction that someone writes about, like the prisoners of the dungeon of Harrenhal.
No,
like the people that were down there in jail, but wake up to realize Harren's dead, the building's burned down, but they survived. Do they still get executed as prisoners?
Yeah.
They starved to death down there waiting for survivor, or do they get released and tell stories? That would be I want to know that story.
That would be great. Yeah, you could find out what happened with those characters. Like some of them would have just been other river lords that Harren had imprisoned, or just other men. So they would just be let go and be happy to bend the knee to Aegon. They'd be like, "Where'd you come from, man? I've been down here for 10 years. I haven't heard anything that's been going on." That's great. Thanks. Yeah, some of them might have been pretty important because we see that at when Arya's there. There's important. Of course, that's a whole thing with they're false prisoners that are let out and they attack the place from the inside. And we're not bringing up any kind of theory like that for this, but there would be interesting people down there in those dungeons. That I mean, this goes with our other question. Like, what about Harren's queen or queens? Like, what happened to them? Were they just not around or dead already, or were they killed too? Or I mean, that one tower is called the Kingspire Tower because everyone thinks that's where Harren was, and maybe that does imply his body was found, and so there was some reason to know it was his. Or it's just the tallest tower, and so that's the one he was in. It makes sense. But that's, of course, not what it was called by Harren. No one knows what the original 5 names of those towers were. He may not have named them yet. He was still maybe in the process of coming up with a name for them. Just hadn't quite done that yet. Yeah. But either way, that's what happened. And there's going to be, like I said, plenty more stories from Harrenhal going forward. We'll have plenty of time, or plenty of opportunity to come back to it and discuss it. Yeah, burning Harrenhal, burning swords, just the metaphorical destruction of a kingdom and the literal destruction of these swords. Both are reforged into something. One a throne, one a cornerstone or a centerpiece, perhaps, of the new 7 kingdoms. And I call it a centerpiece because, well, the Riverlands is in the center. And it's been so different. It's been restructured. It's remade, and probably in a way that creates a lot of positive outlook for them because they've always had so many enemies because they have so many borders. But now they have a central, strong authority figure on their border that won't allow the other kingdoms to invade them. If they invade the Riverlands going forward, they have to face the dragons. They have to face the very thing that did all that to Harrenhal. So that example isn't just about the power of the dragons. It's about the new Riverlands. It's about forging the new Riverlands. Just as the melting of the swords is a forging of the new Iron Throne, the melting of Harrenhal is a forging of the new Riverlands. And that, my friends, will be our main topic next time. We do have a few things to get through before we're done here, but that is our narrative end point as far as how far we're going with Aegon and his history today.
I'm going to add a little corollary to that. It's also the forging of a new Iron Islands.
You're right. That will also be a secondary topic. We're going to be covering both those things next time, probably. Maybe we'll only have time for the Riverlands, but certainly that. It also, on top of that, forges a new Night's Watch. But not just these. That's more of the whole conquest. That's more the surrender of the North, but also the start of it is here because Aegon, the King's Peace, savagely and dramatically reduced recruits to the Night's Watch because it's so often a losing side of a war has a bunch of men sent there. Well, what happens when there's no more wars? Well, that's obviously a good thing, except for this one side effect here. Yeah. Other things we'll talk about next.
It seems like there's a problem with your scenario in the first place if you have this line of defense that's dependent upon war, right? You're doing something wrong with this whole scenario.
Yeah. So next time we'll talk about how the Riverlands and perhaps the Iron Islands were resettled, who was given control of what, any marriages, ongoing loyalties, problems, and then as we make our way towards the next set of the war, where we'll be talking about what Rhaenys and Visenya will be up to. That's an important thing that's going to be coming in the coming weeks as well. So we have quite a bit more to talk about. As we did today, we'll be mixing in some examples from A Song of Ice and Fire where possible, because the lessons and maneuvers and plans of Aegon and his sister still echo forward. And one of the best ways we can engage in this material is to show how that plays out within the confines of the main storyline. Not to mention some things to do with House of the Dragon and the Dance of the Dragons, which of course will be our endpoint for this reread, but many things that we already know about that are going to have touchstones here at the beginning of the Targaryen reign. We'll finish off with this question from Steve Van Pruyen. When did Aegon end Ironborn slavery and thraldom in the Riverlands? That's a great question. We may continue with this question next time. I may have to think about it some more. But it seems to have been immediate. I mean, once the end of Harren came and his sons were wiped out, there was no, remaining immediate relative to try to take up the helm. There were still surviving members of his bloodline, but no one major enough to make any big plays here in the short term.
I was gonna say, it's still so hard to, yeah, you can say the policy is now that there's no thraldom, but how do you actually go through the homes and remove them and rehome them? Were there initiatives to find homes for thralls that didn't have, because I feel like probably a lot of people just lived out the rest of their lives in thraldom still.
Yeah, I agree. There may have been, or there's no, we're not told of any sort of amnesty, or speaks to what I was saying before about what about just Ironborn children or half Ironborn, half Riverlanders and people that enforce marriages? What part of that, how did that all get undone? It was 100 years of Ironborn rule there, plus the Stormlands rule before. So how did they get back to being themselves, and how did they make, it's not talked about very much. So that's something we'll explore a bit more. The more I think about this, the more I think, we're going to want to come back to this question, because it is something we're going to have to use a lot of imagination on, because, it's not very well detailed. But I do think that he didn't end thraldom in the Iron Islands. He definitely left that around, even though he did end the old way in terms of reaving. So we'll have more to say on that as well. But the Riverlands is not, they don't have a long history of that. The Seven don't approve of that. The religion of the realm doesn't really approve of that. So he would want to align things with the common beliefs, the common culture of the realm he's trying to rule. That's something he did a number of times. The worship of the Seven being perhaps the most obvious of that, but other things like having a banner and a sigil and house words, those were not things they had done until the conquest. So those are littler things, but they weren't that little. Remember that quote before, when he unfurled his great dragon-headed banner with 3 heads, all the lords of Westeros knew he was one of them. It may not seem like that big a deal to us, but it apparently was a pretty big deal to them. And that might be, and that's this too. I think this is easier to see why it would be a big deal, because it's explicitly against their religion. Whereas the other stuff is it's not in their religion to have banners and housewords. That's just a cultural tradition, which is important, but it's not a deeply held belief about the universe and everything, life, the universe, and everything.
I imagine it's the burning of Harrenhal / the unfurling of those banners or whatever. It's almost like an Order 66.
Oh. Where
everyone in Riverland is all right, suddenly all the Ironborn are
Yeah, you might be right about that. All Ironborn who aren't cool, whatever, for lack of a better word, who aren't in, are going to get murdered or kicked out. Some of them might just be exiled. Some of them, especially if they have family bloodlines, that might be a little too close to kinslaying or something for them to just, It would be really tricky, though. So, it is a little bit slightly disappointing that there's nothing written about this, but we can make some assumptions and go into that rabbit hole anyway. There's still enough clues for us to figure some things out, and so that is something we'll be thinking about between now and next week. You all are welcome to think about it too, as well as any other related topics. Send us your questions. Send them to westroshistory@gmail.com, or put them in the Discord or our Facebook group, and we will consider them. For example, Guinevere Greenstones here has said, is there a chapter or page references for next week? Well, we're not really doing things chapter by chapter so much, or page by page so much. We're I wouldn't say we're jumping around, but we're really focusing in on each section. So we're still at Aegon's conquest. We're not past that. We certainly aren't even close to done with that yet. We've only done a chunk of it. So I'd say read up on what happens after the fall of Harrenhal, if you want to be curious about that, because Fire and Blood jumps around a lot too, and one of the things we're trying to do is less jumping around. We're trying to stay focused on what Aegon was doing rather than jump back and forth between Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys. We're going to tell the story a little differently because it's a different way to take it in. We don't want to just reinvent the wheel. I mean, it's not really, I wouldn't call that great analysis if you just do everything the way he's doing it. So by presenting it in a different order, in a way that's a little more connected, we hope to analyze Fire and Blood more thoroughly, but in a way that's maybe a little more directly.
Right, we're going to study the fire, and then we're going to study the blood.
Yes. Fire first, blood later.
Yeah.
You know, don't mix them up.
Will come much later.
Yeah, the ice is still a ways away. Aegon's worried about the ice, but even he knows it's in the distance. So the answer to our trivia question, let's get to that. Which famous Viking king is Harwin Hardhand, the grandfather of Harrenhal, based off of? The answer is Harald Hardrada. Harald Hardrada, the famous Viking king who almost was king of England and was king of Sweden and Denmark and Norway, if I remember correctly. Maybe just two of those, but he had an amazing life that's been a feature of many documentaries. He was in the Varangian Guard for the Byzantine Emperor. He may have had an affair with a Byzantine empress. He was a raider and reaver. He was a king and a prince and an exile. He lost his throne. He got it back. And the reason this is such if you're familiar with the life of Harwin Hardhand, a lot of these same elements are present, but the best clue, besides their initials both being HH, is Hardrada translates as something like hard ruler or hard man. Hard hand, Harwin Hardhand, right? Like it's, yeah, Harold, Harwin, Hardrada, Hardhand, yeah.
Say, people threw out a few Viking kings as answers, but lots of people got this one right.
Cool.
People had some good arguments for, I don't know that I can scroll all the way up on it, but
I might have to go read some of these.
Yeah, I forget what someone said. One of them had done a lot of building at the end of his reign, and so I
think Harold may have too, but maybe not as much as this person they're thinking of. Yeah, a lot of Viking kings, like I said, a lot of them when they settle down, they're not really Viking kings anymore. They're just kings that used to be Vikings.
That was a lot of what was behind, quote unquote, the Vikings. Was there's just not a lot of fertile land in that cold northern territory. Yeah. They were just they didn't want to be at war. They wanted farms for their families.
Yeah.
And so when they went south and found England, like, hey, here's some farms for our families. Too bad there's people already living there. But once they killed and kicked those people out, they brought their families down, set up a farm. That's what they were really looking for, is sustainable lives.
Yeah, and that's why this is becoming more and more part of the public conversation, that because of all these DNA tests that are available nowadays. It's like, yeah, if you have like Irish or English ancestry, you probably have Scandinavian too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have lots of Nordic ancestry because of I'm also got Welsh and all that. Yeah.
Which speaks to the problem we were just getting at with the new Riverlands. Like, if you're just gonna, like, you want people of Riverlands blood, well, you can't do that. Like, there's people married the Ironborn, people have married other kingdoms. Like, what does Riverlands blood even mean? When you really get into that, like, what's the difference? Like, they're all Andals,
real Riverlanders. Real Riverlanders are like, my blood runs muddy. Runs thick and muddy, and you don't know where we're all from. That's the real Riverland.
Real Riverlanders wield tridents. Yep. Okay, friends and supporters and fellow obsessed Westorians, that's our episode for today. We'll pick it up at 3 p.m. next week, right where we left off, with the beginning of the forming of the new and glorious Riverlands, new fandangled Riverlands. If you want to stay immersed, whole bunch of Targaryen-related episodes, but you could also dip into our History of the Riverlands. Very old episode, but pretty solid, I think. Also some of our... What's that?
You also read our chapter on Harrenhal.
Our chapter on Harrenhal. We have a chapter written in the book Flight of Sorrows, where we wrote about some of that curse or no curse thing. Something that I want to modernize and do again, because that was like 8 or 10 years ago. But it's still good info, and the other essays in that book are really good. If you've never heard of that book, you can still find it on Amazon. Yeah. It's been a while since we mentioned it, but we're technically authors.
A couple of times over.
That's right. We've done a couple chapters in a couple books. We haven't done a book all ourselves. Maybe one day we'll do that. So yeah, check out our episode on Balerion. That's a particularly strong overlap given what we talked about today, as well as the episodes on Before the Dragons, which kind of speak to just their ignorance of what dragons could do and of how things had always been the way they were for so long and why it was so hard to change those ways. Of course, we have an episode on Dragonstone. We have an episode on Mantaris, which is for patrons and supporters only. We have episodes on Summerhall, speaking of wildfire and another way that stone can burn. Well, that did happen a little bit more recently than the fall of Harrenhal, but pretty darn important for Targaryen history. And we've got 2 episodes on that, one featuring Aerys, one a bit more focused on Rhaegar. Yes. As I said, you can support us on Patreon. You can also support us on Spotify. Now those 2 things are in the process of being merged into one. You can, thus, the world of supporting and patronage is getting a little simpler. It's a good thing. Makes it easier for us to explain it to y'all. But if you have any questions on how to support, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to explain it all. Because I know it's confusing because it keeps changing. But what can we do about that? We're just rolling along with all the changes in this industry. Podcasting is still a pretty new industry in the scheme of things, and all the support industries around it are also relatively new for obvious reasons. So thanks again to y'all for your support in whatever form it comes, whether it's word of mouth, whether it's financial, whether it's just tuning in every week and listening and adding to our view count. That helps too. Thanks to our good friend Nina for her notes. There's a lot of good stuff in there today. I particularly liked her comparison of Bloodraven completely wiping out White Walls versus the lesson of Harrenhal by leaving it standing. It's a great comparison we could make there by 2 people who aren't afraid to be ruthless, but also have thought behind that ruthlessness. It's not just, I mean, do what I say. No, they're trying to send a specific message with that brutality. Thanks as well to Joey, Jesse, and Bran for the help with our music and intro. Same goes for Michael Klarfeld for our original intro. We have so many helpful and excellent artistic people that have made our show better. That includes our friend the Bengineer, who works on the sound quality behind the scenes. And, well, folks, Discord again. I want to remind you, September 26th at 9 p.m. That's trivia. I'm going to throw that out there as often as possible because I know trivia will bring a few extra folks in. And until next time, you know what to do. Valar reread us.